to Queens Behind the Scenes. You know, this is where we get real about leadership, resilience, and living unapologetically. Today, I am honored to sit with Gwen K. Young, a global leader, strategist, humanitarian, and an advocate for women's leadership across the world. From West Africa to Washington, D.C., Gwen's story is proof that women can lead anywhere and at any level with lasting impact. Welcome, Gwen. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited to have you here. I was so excited to meet you. I was so excited to hear your story. And I'm so amazingly happy you agreed to come on my platform and talk about women and leadership. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Put your crown on. I always say that, put your crown on. Yes. So let's jump in here. So Gwen, take us back to those early days of your career. You weren't in a corner office. You were in Senegal, leading a team of over 100 people. What was that experience like for you as a leader, like on the ground?
Great to be here. I'm so excited to be talking with you. I think that on the ground, I went through undergraduate, I got my master's, and I took off and I went directly to the field to work in refugee camps in Africa, right?
Yeah.
And I worked across various countries. I worked in camps, I worked in war zones, I worked in zones that we were covering, and then I was in Senegal where there was not a war. And I think, what it is what you realize from leadership is that you're not alone. So it's not the leader. That's not the only person that makes a difference in the room, right? It's people, it's communities, it's that kind of thing. It's also inspirational, right? When you're in a sort of conflict zone and you can see how to make it better or how to adapt, right? So there's some sort of like inspiration, right? And I'm always like an equity and justice person, but I'm also a people person.
Yes.
So I think from a leadership angle is to teach you how to be a leader, but how to do it with other people, how to be humble, how to communicate, how to work together. And, it's different as opposed to that image of the leader sitting in the corner office by themselves, making a decision and everyone marching around and doing it.
Yeah. But you didn't just deliver aid. You created financial systems for women entrepreneurs. Can you share what motivated you to just go beyond short-term solutions and build something sustainable for those women?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, right? So once you live in a situation like that, or it's like when people say, I went and lived in Italy, and you learn kind of what's going on, how to live in the culture, how to be, as you realize where there's opportunities to create long-term sustainable change. One of the things I learned overseas is that we are more similar than different, that women are still leading their communities. So their rights may be different than in the United States or than in another country, but they're still leading. They're feeding the kids, they're getting education, they're doing healthcare, they're starting businesses. They may be selling onions, they may be repairing clothes, they may be cleaning, and that they need money just as much as someone else does. But also then I realized that there's all these different people on the ground. There's banks, there's governments, there's my international NGO, there's donor money from places like the government or the Gates Foundation, right? There are places to get this. And I'm like, oh, well, let's all do this together. How can we do this?
Yeah.
Right. So that example of being in Senegal, and there were women that were like, we need loans because we have real businesses and these banks won't give them to us. I met a friend of mine at Dahlberg who started her own business with her mother in Senegal. And I said, and I know this bank that I've been working with under a grant for international development. And we all sat down and said, what would it take? And the bank said, well, here's what we need. And Dahlberg says, well, here's a framework that we can do. And I said, here's what the women need. And so we were able to build this fund to give loans to women, but more importantly, have that discussion that women needed that money. And so for me, it was always going in because I saw the way women were leading similarly across countries and communities.
So first of all, that's amazing work. Secondly, what did resilience look like in that moment? Because leading in crisis zones is a whole different test of leadership than what we see in the boardroom in corporations and like what we're generally used to.
Well, it's funny because it does look different, but some of it's similar. So part of it is trust. So resilience has been on building the trust in yourself, but trust in the communities. Hyper focus. Like I was like, here's exactly what we're going to do with this loan fund. This is not this. This is not A. This is not B. This is C. But it's also being adaptable. Like you have to adapt it to the climate. You have to adapt to the culture. You have to adapt it to the banking systems. You have to be adaptable. But one of the things that I realized really got me through from a resilience standpoint is the ability to be decisive, the ability to make a decision. So like, here's what the issue is, here's what we're going to solve, and we're going to solve it. Right.
Yeah.
And it may look different when we solve it. So that's the adaptability, but really
Yeah.
building the trust and the focus, of the people. And I think some of that's relatable to everything, right? In terms of resilience, is you've got to be able to pivot,
Yep.
right? You've got to have trust
Yep.
within the organization. You've got to be
Absolutely.
focused, but you got to make that decision, right? You can't just sit at the table and talk forever. You've got to be decisive.
One thing you said or like just a little bit ago was about, you when going in there, understanding the culture. And I've seen so many people, and this isn't the same, but I've seen so many people, especially right now in our political climate in the United States. A lot of people are like, well, I'm going to go live in Africa, but then they go there and they want they want to live the life they lived here, there and that's just not the same. So I hear you say that. And that brought home that thought for me is, of course, yeah, like that's what you want to be effective, right? Right. And that's how you can be more effective. So, another step you took and experience you had was with the Wilson Center's Global Women's Leadership Initiative. Tell us about the vision behind creating the first ever index that tracked women in political and policy leadership, which is amazing.
Thank you. No, I came in and, took over this program, and the goal was we want to have 50% of women in government by 2050, right? Like a very 50, right? And so first of all, I want to say that I firmly believe that there is capable, amazing women everywhere, right? So this sort of like, we need to train people so somehow they'll fill their role. And I'm a systems person. So I was like, well, first of all, what should we do? So I went and talked to a bunch of people. I did a listening tour. I talked to, various groups, but I also know that if you want to go somewhere, you have to be able to measure it, right? And I realized the index was the way to do this, but I also realized that when we built this index to really understand where women are in government, it can't just be numbers. It can't be there's X amount of ministers and there's X amount of this. We had to look at two different things, the pathways. So they have access to jobs. Do they have access to finance? Like, can they have access to public space? And then we had to look at power. And you and I haven't had this conversation, but I'm sure we're aligned on this. Like, it's not just enough to have that seat where you are.
No,
it's to have the power in the space. It's the power.
And there's a
it's
difference.
The voice.
There is a difference, because you can sit at a table and have a title and all these things, but if you don't have a voice, you're not making an impact.
Well, you're not making an impact. So when I looked at the index, I realized you could bring all that together. You could track and measure, and you could give that evidence base that everyone says, well, why do we need more women? Why do we need more women? I'm like, well, everybody needs data, right?
Right.
But an index was a really fun way to do it. We decided, actually, bizarrely, we decided not to rank. I didn't want to say US was number 1 and Sweden was number 5, which, by the way, it would never be that way at this point. But I wanted to say we did 4 quadrants. Are you balanced? Are you achieving? Are you aspiring? Like, where are you in this journey to equal representation, pathways, and power in government? So we really built the index. And what was interesting about that is we got countries and businesses to listen. I mean, I had embassies come in my office after the index was released and say, I'd like to talk about this. Our data agrees or disagrees with this, and we'd like to talk about it. And so it showed me that if you use sort of an evidence and numbers discussion, it shows me that using that index gave us something to talk about and still talk about what does that look like? And it's not just sitting in the seat. It's having that power, and it's looking at the country saying, do you have the pathways? Is it possible to be in government?
And like you said, if you can't measure it, it doesn't matter really, right? Like, data tells the story. I always say that, like, data tells the story. When you can put data in front of people, it really brings color and context to the state of where we actually are, right? Like, this is where we are. We can't base where we want to go without knowing exactly the data, what the data looks like of where we are right now.
Exactly.
You just can't.
Well, to your point, it's like, you can't go, if you can't measure where you're going, if you can't account for it, you're right, number one.
Right.
And it really is important to have that data and how you use that data.
Right.
How are we talking about that, and how we're using that to inform the value of, for example, when you talk about like women, peace, security, democracy, and strength of communities, right? There's data that shows that women in government can grow the GDP by 6%. There's data that says if women sign the peace treaty or at the table, right, it's 35% more likely to last 15 years or longer, right? And that starts to answer that why. but it also starts to give us a way to go and like, how much more do we need? You know, the data about women in leadership is the 30% tipping point. 30% of your board, 30% of your organization, 30% of your military. That's when it starts from a diversity and data or equity standpoint to change and create more opportunities for everybody.
Yeah. Well, fast forward today, and this is the day and age where I met Gwen, her fabulous self. So I met Gwen through one of my previous guests and a very, very close friend of mine, India Gary Martin. Y'all might have saw her on here last season. Gwen is leading the Women's Business Collaborative, an alliance of over 80 organizations. What drew you to this work? I'm sure what drew you to a lot of your other work. I mean, there's purpose behind it, but what really drew you specifically to this particular work?
That's a great question. I think it's twofold. Well, so the trajectory of most of my career has been a focus on gender equality, gender equity, and women's leadership. But the real other thing that drew me to Women Business Collaborative were sort of two things. One is to work with the business and private sector, which is something I hadn't necessarily done, to say if you can shift what's going on in the business landscape, you create economic empowerment opportunities for everyone. And the third thing that attracted me was the collaborative nature of it. You know, I'm a people person. I love to work with partnerships. I love to build them. And I know that you go farther together, right? You go faster alone, but you go farther together and you can create long-term sustainable change. And when I looked at that, I was like, we've got a collaborative, we've got women's leadership. We're going to get the business community behind this and have some skin in the game, not saying it's somebody else's job, but it's our job as well. And I was like, this is where we can drive long-term and systemic change. And so that's where I was like, this is where I want to be, right? So I looked at it and I looked at the ability to really kind of be in a new area, learn something, but really drive that collaborative action and that partnership.
Yeah. I want to tout some of your accomplishments here because I think they're worth noting. You doubled fundraising, you expanded programming, and you brought together thousands of executives. I just, to me, I think that needs to be said. Now, what I do want to understand, we are in a different environment right now, an environment that we are celebrating women still, but I don't, as a country, not the world, because the world we know is a completely, totally different place, but the country, how has that affected the Women's Business Collaborative, and what are you doing to course correct or mitigate?
Well, in some ways we're doing, and I will say this to everyone, we're doing exactly what we were meant to do. Our mission is equal position, pay, and power for all women in business. And we do that by mobilizing leaders across the business community to ensure that that happens. So we're working with, you know, our current sponsors, partners, and champions are sort of three parts of our community because they're still dedicated to that mission. Women are still 50% of the workforce, they're 30% of the C-suite, right? That is still, we're sort of doing the business as usual. We haven't changed. We're not going to change what we do. We work with men and women in order to make this happen, right? And we work not just with the Fortune 500 and the S&P companies, but we work with women-owned businesses. But what we're really doing is trying to really, probably more so this year than other years, is a couple of things. Combine our advocacy with partners in those groups that are having conversations. So there's a lot of support going on this year for women-owned businesses. And really, as a part of our economy, they're 39% of all businesses. Revenues are rising. There's a lot of them. So really getting behind collectively the support for the women-owned businesses for their access to capital. So we do Women's Capital Summit where we bring together women-owned businesses and investors together to talk about growing capital. That's the focus. The second thing is looking for places where we can have that conversation in a way that is different maybe than before. So one area is the sports industry. We're looking at as an industry, men and women's sports, women's sports. There's a lot of women in men's sports. There's a lot of women leaders in sports. There are a lot of women's sports teams, and they're growing. It's not just soccer, right? Now it's softball, volleyball is coming, Division I flag football, right? There are areas where the Olympics were 50-50, both in terms of governing athletes and the medals. So there's a space where you can talk about leadership in women, that you can talk about it from the girl up to the senior leader and have that conversation. And it's a fun space because sports is a fun space to have a conversation. It's also some of the most dynamic and competitive men and women that I've ever met in the sports place, right? So this
Yeah.
conversation of how can we be better? How can we get the best athletes? How can we have the best leaders? It's a really great space to have that conversation, because the traits in sports about teamwork, resilience that you spoke about, competition, that comes out of sports as well. So it's a really
Mm-hmm.
great space to have this conversation.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, if we move down to mentorship, coaching, and legacy, one thing that stands out about your journey is how intentional you have been about your mentorship. Why is mentoring other women such a core part of your leadership?
Well, it's such a core part because I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't have that mentorship or that sponsorship. And it's a core part of what I do every day, because what I believe is that we can do it. We can do it together. And we really need to bring that next generation up. And so I really believe in every team that I've done. I believed in mentoring and sponsoring. I believe in working as a team. Maybe this week, Charise, you're setting the agenda. Maybe next week, another team member setting the team agenda. Like, we all need to be there working together. And so mentorship is such an important part of that. And it's such an important part of where do you want to go in your career. This is not, I have not had, if you look at my resume, and you and I have talked a little bit, I do not have a linear career path. I did not go to law school and become a corporate lawyer and rise up to partner and equity partner, right? I've had a very kind of, what's the next great opportunity? Where can I learn? Where do I want to be? Where are my strengths? And I want other people to hear, you can do it. You have to know your
Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses. How can I help you go where you need to go? Because the world feels a bit of a swirl this year. Everyone's wondering about AI. They're wondering about technology. They're wondering about how much money they make. They're wondering about
Mhm.
purpose, the mission of where they work. And so I've always done that. So I want to be able to talk to other people about why I did it, how they can do it, but how, more importantly, what are they thinking? Where do they want to be? And how to, some people want that linear. They
Yeah.
want a very clear path. They're like, I want to build it. I want to check the boxes. And not
Yeah.
everyone wants to be a leader. Not everybody wants to be CEO.
I say that all the time. One's ambition doesn't mean, like, just because I want to do this doesn't mean everybody else has that same ambition. You pour into other women. Can you give us some examples of people that poured into you to make you the wonderful leader you are today, and showed you the ropes of how to operate? Because you can take that advice, but you make it your own. So tell me those people that poured into you to make your leadership your own.
I think there's a couple people. So probably classic is my mother. And my mother was, very much in sort of several ways. Like, I played soccer when I was
Mm-hmm.
young on a soccer team that was men. There were two girls and the rest were men. And when I was going to college, my mother said to me, you should go to a women's college, and let me tell you why. Now, the choice was mine, but she very clearly guided me. And she said, my first boss came from a women's college. You need that confidence that women need. And so that was one of the first people that sort of guided me from kind of that mentor. In my career, I had a fair amount of men who said to me, here's how you do this. If you want to, these are the things you need to do. Or, I understand that this isn't working for you. Let me help you find something else, right? And so it was listening in that piece of the puzzle. One of my first bosses, who's a member of what I call my posse, right, was my boss when I was 25 years old, right? And he's like, when I was there, he's like, if you're going to go to law school, you can do this. I'm going to help you. Why don't you try this job? Because it's different than what you thought about. See if you like it. So somebody who was offering opportunities for me, which I think is fantastic. He just got married last weekend in Sweden, so we're excited for him. Um,
That's amazing.
and that is amazing, right? That is
It
amazing.
is.
But I also grew up in a time. I grew up in a time where, and this is going to sound cheesy, but I love popular culture. I grew up in a time when it was free to be you
I
and me
love
with
pop
Marlo
culture.
Thomas and Alan Alda.
Yes, I
And
love
so
pop
that
culture.
scene, don't you love pop culture? So
I do.
watching your rock stars, watching your TV stars, watching the people you think are fabulous, watching Beyonce, watching whoever you think is fabulous. And for me, it was this Free to Be You and Me and Marlo Thomas and like questioning
Freedom.
everything in the 70s. And I was like, I love Free to Be You and Me. I love Rosie Greer saying it's all right to cry, right? Don't you let like, so I grew up with that kind of thing. So I really, and that, it sounds weird, but you absorb that stuff. Like, you absorb, like, I'm not too highbrow to admit that's
No,
only books and academics, right?
no, and we shouldn't be. I mean, literally, a lot of my motivation, I can tell you now, a woman to woman, pop culture person to pop culture person, I can tell you one of the biggest motivations for my book, my company, came from looking at Beyonce and how, like, not from a branding perspective. I mean, she does knocks it out the park in every way, but from her even one of her lyrics was like AOTY when, album of the year. She said, took that shit on the chin, came back and fucked up the pen. She's like, I came back at it like, so like to me, I was
Yep.
like, yeah, because I started consulting before years ago and like I didn't really do it that great. And I was like, you know what? Let me try this a little different. The way that she's told us that people can't put you in a box. Genre is a funny thing, but I can do whatever I want. You can't tell me I can't do country music. You can't tell me I have to stick in
Yep.
this place or this space. If you can do it, I can do it. And I have drawn a lot from Kris Jenner and Kim Kardashian and how they built their
Yep.
empire. These are powerful, smart women. I don't care what you did in your life and what happened with whatever made you famous. What I'm looking at is you are building a blueprint of success and you are doing it with resources. And I need to understand how how you utilize those resources to make what I am doing successful. And I take from all those portions of my life. You will, when the book comes out, and I'm sure you'll get a copy, you will see those referenced in my book a lot because I think that's important. You do take from that. It would be silly for me to say the only thing I took was from my master's program and all the theory that like, that's bullshit. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just not the truth. You
No,
know what I mean? It's just not the truth.
it it isn't. You'll appreciate this. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, 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 that's on you. Go.
No, I was just going to say, so I was listening to St. Marshall, who I know, and I was listening to her a couple months
Okay.
ago,
Yeah.
and she was talking about her journey to the Dallas Mavericks. And so everything about Scent hit me since Journey. It's all a great story. It's fantastic. I think she's an
Yeah.
amazing, amazing person. But what's interesting is she made it very clear. She's like, did that in her 50s. And I was like, well, if she can do that, to your point about consulting, I was like, well, then I can do that.
And you
Right?
can.
Hello. And so now it's like, oh, so I came back and then I start, because I talk to people, I'm like, did you know, did you know, did you know? But I realized what it incentivized in me is like, oh yeah, I can do this. I can do what I need to do. I can pivot if I want to. Right. And that kind of listening, yeah, I think it's fantastic.
Exactly. I think listening from all different aspects of your life, you don't just draw. And even in my leadership book, I talk about like, I take a little bit of a leadership. I'm the oldest of all the kids in my mom's kids. And so I took a little bit of leading from there. I mean, I started leading when I was younger. I was a latchkey kid. I'm typical Gen Xer. So I took leading from there. But I want to get back to you because you have such an interesting career, and I want to make sure I gather all of these things so the audience knows Gwen and her fabulousness. So, looking back across your career from humanitarian aid in Africa, international policy, and now leading this global collaborative, what are the three biggest lessons you've learned about leadership?
The three biggest lessons about leadership. So I think that there are threefold. So I think one is that you have to be resilient and adaptable, right? You're not, and it goes back, and that's the lead. There's also the leading alone, right? Leadership is not like there is one formula. You get there, you're a leader, you're done, you check the box, you got your law degree, you passed the bar, this kind of thing. I think that is not something that I think is. So you got to be resilient. I think you've got to be adaptable, adapt to the situation, adapt to the thing. And then I think you've got to be able to get things done. And I don't know if that's decisiveness. I don't know if that's clear mission. I think it's all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I think to lead, you'll hear it like, be clear with your teams, be clear about what you expect, what's your mission, what's the focus. Well, it's all of that. You've got to have, like I always say, I have the boldest vision on the planet. And here's the very detailed work plan of how we're going to get there. And is everybody clear about their piece of it? Because to be bold for bold's sake is fine. But if you can't get it done, be decisive, get the work done,
Right.
then I don't think that's leading. Right. So I think it's that decisiveness, resilience, and adaptability. And underneath all of that is how you're interacting with people.
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's right. So, what's the next one?
What's the next
What's
one? What's the next?
the
We're going to make a list of leadership qualities or the next leadership position. What's the?
Well, it was three biggest lessons. You got to be know how to get shit done, right? You got to be able to get shit
Yep.
done.
Yep. Well, you've got to be
And
resilient. You've got to be
and
resilient,
resilient.
adapt, right?
Yep, adapt and resilient.
Yep. 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 And then if you're putting resilient and resilient in the same box as opposed to two separate boxes, it's you got to build trust with people, your team, partnerships, whoever you're working with. You've got to have you've got to trust people. They have to trust you. With no trust, there is no leadership.
Yeah. 100% agree. 100% agree. Now, if you could sit down with your younger self at the very start of your career, what would you tell young Gwen?
What would I tell young Gwen? That is interesting. What would I tell young Gwen? It's funny because I don't have any regrets, and I'm not someone who looked back and goes, I wish I would have done, or I wish I could have done. I probably should have saved more money when I started out. So I would say start saving money right away.
Start saving money.
Start saving money. But I think what I would have said to my younger self is no matter what position you're in, you're a leader, and think about yourself as a leader. Because I think if you can think about that, it's like in the workplace. You can mentor when you're 31. You don't have to be 50. You can mentor and be a peer colleague to somebody. So I think if I had thought of myself as a leader earlier on, as opposed to ambitious or climbing, or if I get this position, I'll be a leader, I would have said just whatever position you're in, think about leadership qualities. Think about the qualities we talked about, right? Empowering your teams, right? Cross-cultural intelligence, all that's working, being reliant. If you think about yourself as a leader in whatever job you're in, then I think you get those qualities, you get those habits, it builds your confidence. But you can be a leader in any position. You don't have to be the CEO. That's not the only leader in a company, right?
That's right.
So that's what
That's
I would tell
right.
myself. Think of yourself as a leader.
That's a good piece of advice. That's something I should have probably told myself as well. I probably should have told myself to save some money too. That part as well.
Money, hands down, hands down.
Now, there are queens listening, women leading in corporate America, but there are women starting their own businesses. There are women running households. What's one piece of advice that you give them about claiming their space at the table? We talked about this table.
Yes. So here is the thing, right? Is claim your space at the table. Your space does not need to be the whole table. You don't need to be what you don't want to be is the only person at the table. But I mean that in a couple of ways, right? So one is the confidence. You should be at the table. You should be at the table, no doubt. But when you talk about something like work-life balance, which is a term I don't necessarily agree with, you might have to do a lot of things, but it doesn't mean, quote unquote, you can do it all. You can't work 50 hours a week and take care of your kid 50 hours a week, take care of your family 50 hours a week. So you have a right to be at that table. If you're like, I'm at that table Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm getting my work done and this is what I'm doing, or I'm at this table and this is my skill set and strength and this is what I bring, you still have a right to be at that table. I think sometimes we think we have to be the head of the table, or we have to sit at the table 10 hours a day, or that we have to have every single skill set at that table. I think you can go in and say, the reason I'm here is to make dessert. That's why I'm here. I'm not sure my analogies are working, by the way, but I'm trying.
Right? No, you're doing good.
Be at that table, be at the table when you can be at the table, but know that you have a right to be at that table, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a lot that you might be balancing, whether it's your health, whether it's your family, whether it's your partner, right? Or whether it's just you want to do this job and that job, you still have a right to be at the table in both of those things. And so I think, but you have to know, how do I want to show up? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses, right? And what do I bring? And sometimes what you bring to the table is listening, right? Sometimes what you bring to that table is I'm here to listen. Not everyone has to speak, has to claim a spot, right? But be there, be at that table, and then you'll know your place and time to bring what you need to bring to that table, or to keep my dessert analogy, to that meal.
To that meal. Well, I know that for some of us, and I know for me specifically, I don't know if this has happened to you. I'd imagine most women it has. Imposter syndrome is real though. Like we think we don't belong. Like, and that all goes because there are not the same examples for women as there are for men in leadership. We know that.
Yes.
We know that. So imposter syndrome is going to be, I think, for me, it seemed like it's a natural thing that's just going to happen because we just don't have those same examples. So what do you tell somebody that does have that imposter syndrome? He's like, I mean, I just don't feel like I should be here. I don't have an example of myself, to be here. What would you tell that woman? Maybe I'm that woman, what would you say?
Be curious and ask questions. So maybe you're at that table, not because you need to show up and say, here's who I am, but maybe you're at that table to learn, do I want to be at this table? What are they doing? So like I always say to people, like, if you don't know what to say, but you feel like you have to say something, ask a question.
Yeah.
And also listen and be curious. Because when you listen, right, get out of your head and listen to what's going on, you may realize I have a right to be at this table, or that person across the table is just as confused as I am. That person doesn't even belong at the table, but I do. Or they don't know about this particular thing, and guess what? I do. So I always say, go, it's like a class. Go and listen. Go and take it as not that you need to show up, not that you don't belong there, but I'm going to go learn, and I'm going to be curious, which means I'm going to listen. I'm going to ask questions, you know, one-on-one or at the table, but like, I'm like, ask questions or go learn. It may be that you fit at that table, and it may be that you don't, right? From that imposter syndrome standpoint, but you've got to listen and be curious. It's like a class in college. If you don't go, you don't know whether it's a good class for you or not. And that depends on the course, the teacher, and who else is in the class. So go and listen and be curious. So that's what I say to people, is look at it as a learning exercise. Maybe you don't want to be there, but you won't know until you go. You won't know until you listen, and you won't know until you ask questions. Hopefully framing it that way creates a different expectation on yourself, right, of why you're there.
That's right. Well, Gwen, is there any last pieces of advice or last things you want to share with us about the Women's Business Collaborative and things that you're working on right now? Because you have such an interesting life, such an interesting story, such an interesting career. I think I know for our lunch, I learned from you just in that little amount of time. So is there anything you would add about any of those topics that could be additive to some woman out there listening to us today?
I'm going to answer that in two ways, right? The first thing is we touched on it a little bit, but I think, and I know you know this, in the global world that we live in, cultural IQ and cultural intelligence is so important, right? Understanding that people look, talk, act, expect different things. And I think learning, when we live in this global world, a little bit about that cultural intelligence of how you interact with people from different cultures, and different cultures within the United States, right, is something that I think we really have to. We're an interconnected global world with a lot of technology, and figuring all that out, I think, requires that cultural IQ, if you will. And then the last thing I'll say, and because you and I had this conversation, and I firmly believe this, is, you know, come join Women Business Collaborative. And we are a community of partner organization, corporate organizations, women-owned businesses, and individuals, men and women. And our whole point is, where are we going together? What's the next step, right? This is not a what's wrong and all the problems in the world, but it's like, what can we do together to support you and your business, you and your journey? Or how do we make company X just a better company? Or how do we learn from company X how to do it? And so come join us, because what we're really trying to do is create a dynamic business landscape, men and women, equal position, pay and power for everybody. And just, you know, this is where things are happening, right? Products are produced, ideas are generated. So come join us. We are an incredibly supportive and amazing group of women, and there's mentorship and sponsorship and coaching and opportunities. So come join us. And our big event is mid-September, where we're talking about workplace, technology, capital for women-owned business, women in sports leadership. So come join us, because you'll see some of the most amazing women and men and some of the most amazing things happening in the business world. It's an exciting place to be.
I just love all of that. And I will put, you know, you and I will connect. I'm going to put everything about how to join the Women's Business Collaborative in the show notes. I'm going to have all the information that you need to be put in there so that we're able to get people over to the Women's Business Collaborative. Gwen, I just want to thank you for sharing your journey. You've shown us that leadership isn't just local, it's global. We both knew this, but now they know. And that women belong everywhere decisions are being made, period, point blank. Queens, I hope you were able to walk away from this conversation ready to think bigger, act bolder, and lead with your crown held high. Also, coming soon, we have a lot going on the Poise front. Poise, our book is looking like it's dropping in November, so I'm super excited about our book. I'm not giving away the title just yet, but Poise is in it, and we know that stands for precision, optimization, influence, strategy, and endurance. And I am super excited about the team I'm working with to publish this book, my public relations team, and everyone that has been working really hard to get me out there and get me seen and get me some speaking engagements, but more to come on Poise. Don't forget to subscribe. Share this episode with another queen that needs to hear it, and leave us a review so more women can find us. And until next time, keep queening, keep your head held high and your crown straight. Thank you so much. Have a great day.